My name is Selina Wang. I am an Associate Professor of Cooperative Extension at the Department of Food Science and Technology at UC Davis. Today, I'll be talking to you about adulteration in the edible oil industry, sharing some of the findings from my research from the past decade and more recently, and what have we learned along the way. So first, as you probably are aware that our world feels smaller than it has been before due to globalization. We can now send foods around the world. There's an impacting various types of foods, that's food, pet foods, confections, produce, and seafood, and others. So with that, we're also experiencing food fraud. But what I want to tell you is that food fraud is an old and modern problem due to various different reasons. But for context, this is a book that was by a chemist, Frederick Acum, from 1820. And in the book, it says, "The man who robs a fellow subject of a few shillings on the highway is sentenced to death, while he who distributes a slow poison to a whole community escapes punishment." And he was referring to food adulteration, and this was quite controversial at the time. He was not alone. Mark Twain, in Life of Mississippi in 1883, he wrote, "They make olive oil out of cottonseed oil nowadays so that you can't tell them apart." So this is a figure that I made basically talking about some important areas that we work in food that covers food quality, food safety, food defense, and food fraud, and economic motivated adulteration, which is what we're talking today, and some examples of them. But basically we can differentiate these into two categories. Food quality and food safety usually source from unintentional reasons, versus food defense and food fraud, they don't happen by an accident usually. And for example, food defense is usually motivated by terrorism or sabotage. So that could be an employee that left a food company not on a good turn, and then he may try to do something to sabotage, or more larger scale, this could be a country or worldwide issue related to terrorism. And for both food safety and food defense, increase public health risks and also increase public fear, versus the food fraud or economic motivated adulteration is obviously motivated by economic gains. But like food quality issues, both of these, food quality and food fraud, increase health risks, just like food safety and food terrorism do, and they decrease consumer confidence. For example, if you are aware of a product that has been recalled multiple times due to food quality issues, well, usually that's related to food safety. But sometimes it's if you have aware of a product that doesn't have the best food quality, then you also lose consumer confidence. Some example of food fraud is infant formula. That's the one that a lot of people are aware. Horse meat, honey, spice, especially the high-value ones, juice, and oil, which we'll talk more about today. And this is just some different types of adulteration or food fraud. And it can happen by dilution, which means that you add something. So for example, you may add sugar syrup to honey to dilute it. So sugar is cheaper than honey, so you can make profit of that. And addition, which is like adding melanin to infant formula or pet food, adding something that shouldn't be there, something that can be found in magic eraser instead of infant formula. And substitution, which is common in seafood industry. That's, for example, you found fresh salmon. And or omission, in this case, this apple juice didn't contain any apple juice at all. Or concealment. And we found this in our study over a decade ago, where an olive oil that was labeled, it was canola oil that was labeled as olive oil, but to make it look more green, they added some chlorophyll to it. So we'll focus on this corner of the chart from earlier. And there's no statutory definition of food fraud or economically motivated adulteration, or EMA, as it's listed here. It's generally considered a subset of food fraud. And FDA started a working group to get more definition and more attention to this issue. So just a little history lesson on where we've been with olive oil. So the first USDA standards on olive oil was published in 1948, and it's a voluntary standard, meaning you can sign up to have your oil assessed by USDA inspectors, but it's not an enforced standard, meaning not every company to follow it. And I'm only listing some documented adulteration cases here. There's certainly a lot more than what I'm listing here, but I just wanted to add some time frame to these cases so you have an idea. But in 1981, this is a very well-known case in the olive oil industry. It's called the toxic oil syndrome, where 600 people died and more than 25,000 people were hospitalized. And this was where they had street vendors that were selling olive oil, but they were actually not olive oil. They were industrial rapeseed oil. Now, all of us at some point likely have had rapeseed oil. It's commonly used in food or in the food service industry. But in this case, so you normally wouldn't get sick if you consume rapeseed oil. But in this case, this was an industrial rapeseed oil, which was not supposed to be for human consumption. So that was what happened here. And this shows you that adulteration is a economically motivated issue, but it's a health risk, because you don't really know what you're looking for or what you're eating, versus if you see something that has mold on it and you kind of have a feeling this is probably not great. If I'm going to take a risk, I'm going to eat it. Maybe I might get sick. But in this case, you really have no idea as to why you might get sick. So sometimes it's actually more dangerous because it's harder to find the source of the health issues that someone may encounter. So after that, there were more adulteration cases in various countries. But there was this article in 2007 that got a lot of attention, written by Tom Miller, and the article was called Slippery Business, where the journalist, the author, did some research and basically found out that fraud was so widespread that few growers or processors can make an honest living, because if you're selling something that's not olive oil as olive oil, you can sell it for cheaper, or you can sell it for more money, and you can make more money. And people who are actually honestly making olive oil, they're not able to compete at that price, because it's not cheap to grow olives, make them into oil, and sell them. So after that, more documented adulteration cases. And in 2010, UC Davis, this was my postdoctoral research project, where we went to the supermarket like any consumer would, except we bought a lot more oils, and we took them to the lab, and then we also subject them to a sensory panel and to see if they met the USDA standard that was published in 1948. And the reports are available on the website, but the general conclusions listed here. Basically, we found that 69% of imported olive oil did not meet the USDA standard, and 10% of California-made olive oil did not meet the sensory standard. So we're talking about sensory standards here. And the report received a lot of attention. Some of you may have heard this is 12 years ago now. So that project probably should get updated, but it's still online, and a lot of people have made a lot of news about it. And a lot of articles have been written since then. And we have also worked with USDA to update their standards from the one that from 1948. We updated it in 2010 so that it includes more oils that the chemistry of the oil are better reflected in the newer standard, so it's more inclusive and more fair. And then in 2012, the U.S. International Trade Commission started a 1-year-long investigation on the competition of olive oil in the country, and it was a big project. And you can also see the report online. It's very, very, very detailed and thorough. Really excellent, actually, to report that. I could tell it took a lot of effort. But this was one of the key findings was unenforced standards lead to mislabeled products, weakening the competitiveness of quality producers. Agreed. So after that, California started draft its own standards, and it was published and approved in 2014. This standard applies to every California olive oil producer who make more than 5,000 gallons a year. Unlike the USDA standards, this is enforced, meaning if you're a producer who make more than 5,000 gallons a year, your oil should meet the standard if you want to sell it as extra virgin olive oil or other grades of olive oil. So to get that standard published, it took a lot of work, a lot of research, because it was based on data that we have collected in California. So this is a laboratory scale olive oil extraction system. I just want to show you in case you haven't seen how one makes olive oil. So this is a much smaller scale, but it works for our purpose. So you get olives, you put them into this crusher with the skin, the pits, the whole thing, and make it into a paste that kind of looks like an olive tapenade, smell like it too. And then you put that paste into these little pots. And then these pots have a spindle that spins around, and you can set a timer for 45 minutes or so. And after that, after 45 minutes of spinning, kneading the paste, basically, you can see the oil droplets start forming on the side, and that's your olive oil. And you extract it by dumping it into a centrifuge so the oil can separate out from other parts, other components, and this is the oil that you are left with. So you can see that most of it is not olive oil, so it takes a lot of effort to make olive oil, starting with olives, because there's a lot of other things that's in olives that it's not part of oil. And then we make these little vials of oil. That's enough for the chemical analysis that we do right next door in the lab. So this is how we know what the chemistry or the chemical profile of olive oil look like, and we're confident it's authentic because we make it ourselves. For some of these olives, we actually grow them ourselves on campus at UC Davis. And then after all that effort, a lot more documented adulteration took place. No, it's not an easy fix. And Forbes had this article that said the olive oil scam, if 80% is fake, why do you keep buying it? It's important to know that when we publish these reports, we never said an oil is fake. The language we use is if this oil meets the standard or not. And currently, there's a citizen petition that's been submitted together by the California or the U.S. Olive oil producer, along with the importers, and to FDA to have a standards of identity for olive oil and olive pomace oil, which is a type of oil that you extract from the byproduct of making extra virgin olive oil. So it remains to be seen. The result of this may take some time, but one of the statement that the people who are supporting this said buying quality extra virgin olive oil is hard, but not because there aren't quality products on supermarket shelves. It's because there are just no rules to stop bad actors from misrepresenting what they're selling. I think this can be applied to many other products besides extra virgin olive oil, but I think this is true. If you go to a supermarket, likely there are quality products, but I think it's not quite fair to the consumers, knowing that they may or may not know what to buy because there are no enforced standards. So, in my opinion, I've been working on standards for a long time. I helped to draft the California olive oil standard. I'm involved in a lot of this work. So, in my opinion, that standards are needed for safety, quality, and purity. We talked about that this is a risk for consumers, but since they don't know what a potential risk might be. And certainly it's needed for quality and purity assurance. Standards need to be enforceable. There are plenty of olive oil standards out there, but they're not enforceable. Standard development is not a straight path and it requires cooperation. And this is a part that my lab play and I play because we do academics research, and I think we're a safe place for individual companies to come together to work on standards together. They may have different marketing strategies and interests, but having a good standard that is inclusive and fair will protect all the honest producers and their customers, which is what good companies will want to see. Now, we will move on to a different topic, but that's related. So as you can see, this is how one makes adulterated oil. It's money driven. So, okay. So as you know, that you probably, when you go to the market, you see there's more and more avocado oils at the supermarket. They are increasing in popularity, partially that consumers associate the health benefit of avocados with avocado oil. So it's kind of an easy sell. You don't need to educate a consumer the health benefit of avocado oil since they seem to know that already. Unlike olive oil, which has too many standards, they're not all enforced, but there are a lot of people been studying olive oil for a long time in the European countries. Not much has been studied for avocado oil. There are no official standards that are available currently. So in this study, we collected 22 samples. This is similar to what we did for the olive oil study 12 years ago, although it's a smaller sample size, given there are not as many brands out there. I think we collect as many brands as we can, and we collected extra virgin and refined and unspecified. They're basically either it doesn't say it's extra virgin or it doesn't say it's refined, or for some bottles it say extra virgin on the front and then refined on the back. So it's really not clear what they are. And you can see the range of the price is quite wide. And we use a similar methods that we use for olive oil. So basically you break it down to quality parameters, which is mostly related to oxidation. When the oil ages, the qualities will decrease. And purity, is this oil actually made from avocados or is it oil made from something else? And minor components, that is more related to health. So tocopherols are vitamin E, and chlorophyll, that is the green hues that give your green vegetable their color, and these are generally good for our health. So we wanted to know the concentration of them in the oil. And we published this paper in an open access journal. Again, if you're interested, you can Google it and then you can find the whole paper. But it's we published it in October of 2020. And basically our finding was 82% of the samples were of poor quality, meaning they're mostly oxidized or they were adulterated. And 3 samples had no avocado oil in it. They were 100% soybean oil. And 2 of them were labeled as extra virgin. So not only the oil was not avocado oil, it was definitely not extra virgin. So based on this, we know we need to have standards, and then the standards need to be inclusive for different varieties, growing regions. At the same time, it needs to be clear about if this oil is actually avocado oil or is it something else. This is related to what I said earlier. This is not a straightforward nor easy path, but we really wanted to have this call to action for industry, government, researchers to work together on this really important issue. Similar to our olive oil study, the report, the article, received a lot of attention because people were surprised. They felt cheated, and we all feel like we need to change this. So food fraud compromises consumers' trust, reduces livelihood of honest producers, and undermines the credibility of industry and government over the quality and safety of food. And this is why I do this work, because I feel strongly about this. So what are we doing now that we started with olive oil? We're knee-deep with avocado oil currently. We are going back to the drawing board, so to speak, but not completely. So when I first started this work 13 years ago, I was talking to someone in the olive oil industry, and they said, you must just have a machine in your lab. If I put the oil in there, a green light will show up if it's real, and a red light will show up if it's not, right? I feel like in this day we're have an iPhone that's really just like a computer. We ought to have a machine like this. In reality, we don't, because it's complicated. Earlier, I mentioned that a good standard needs to be inclusive to cover different varieties, different growing regions, climate. And the only way to know how to do that is to have data, because we need to know what they all look like, how they're all different. So in reality, we need to do a lot of work. We need to collect a lot of samples that cover different regions, different varieties from different climate. We need to know what they look like. Then we will have an idea as to what a pure olive oil or a pure avocado oil will look like. Doesn't matter if they're from Tunisia, from Mexico, from South Africa, from the US, from Greece, then we will know what they look like. So we're doing this, starting with avocados, making them into oil, just like you saw how we did it with olive oil. A ton of work. And we make avocado oil. So an interesting thing about avocado oil is that for olives, most producers use the whole fruit. So olives is tiny, and then tiny compared to avocados. And you put it in the crusher. For avocados oil, some producers use the whole fruit, some don't. So some only use the flesh part. So they take away the skin and then the pits. So our standards need to be inclusive for that as well, because we want to see, we also want to understand how does this have including skin and the pits affect the chemical profile. Luckily for us, so far they are not too different in terms of their purity parameters. So that's a good thing, because it will make having the standards, it will make it easier to have a standard that everyone can follow regardless their processing methods. So part of what I do is to educate future scientists so we can have people who help to work on these issues. I also help to educate consumers. I also help to educate industry professionals. For food buyers, they struggle with what oil they should buy for their store. For food processors, the ones they use avocado oil or olive oil as an ingredient for their product, they need help to know where they should source their oil. There's a lot of people who are out there trying to do the right things, and due to the lack of knowledge and information, it's hard to make the right decisions sometimes, and I do the best I can to help them. So where do we go from here? I do believe that we did the first thing for both olive oil and avocado oil, which was raise awareness and call for action. There's some collateral damage to the industry when you do a study like that. But hopefully at the end, I think it's the right thing to do. Because we need to protect consumers. We also need to protect honest companies. And require industry to work together, coordination and cooperation. And we need to have government's involvement, their support, scientific organizations, which I try to pull everyone together to give everyone a voice and a safe and unbiased platform to have these discussions. My lab is working really hard on collecting data and validate our results. And then we can have a draft standard that can be adopted and enforced. Sounds easy. Lastly, I will leave you with some tips for consumers, because sometimes I talk for a long time, but at the end, people just want to know what oil I should buy. So these are what I tell them. I would say, know the smell of freshness. It should smell fresh, not rancid. And a protective container is important. Clear plastic is generally not good for protecting an oil. And you can look for a quality seal, meaning this oil has to meet a certain level of quality and purity. And I store the oil in a cool and dark place, and oil will never get better. It only deteriorates. So if you can store it in a cool and dark place, that will help to keep the oil last longer before it goes rancid. And use it up. If I will use it as fast as I can. And purchase the size that makes sense for my level of consumption. And that's it. Thank you for having me today. I enjoy talking to all of you, even though we're virtual. maybe one day we'll all meet together and talk some more. Thanks.